Hi, this is Peter Francho, your state comptroller in Maryland. You're listening to the Conduit Street Podcast, the official podcast of the Maryland Association of Counties.
Hello and welcome to the Conduit Street Podcast. Kevin Kinnally here with Michael Sanderson. Michael, we are still social distancing. We are recording from our homes. We do have a special guest today, but we are not in the office. We are not in the quote-unquote studio. But Michael, how's everything going over there at the Sanderson home?
We're doing okay here. Missing all the face-to-face, but getting into the flow of things, I guess. How about you?
Same here. Definitely miss the face-to-face, miss being around all of our friends in Annapolis. But we do have a very special guest today. I think it's very appropriate in terms of the timing. Michael, why don't you go ahead and introduce our guest?
I'll set this up a little bit and say we have been trying to look for ways we can broaden the reach of this podcast and reach out into areas that we think are interesting components of what counties do, but also policy and governance. So communications is one of those topics that we know is important and it plays an interesting role. And I think on our to-do list for some time has been we ought to bring in a good communications person to talk to the Conduit Street audience a little bit about how that fits in. Lo and behold, over the last few weeks, we've seen Mike Ricci, who does communications for Governor Hogan, take on a high-profile role with the administration, particularly on response to coronavirus and all the things that have been involved there. Mike has made some comments about listening to the podcast. We took that as an opening to invite him to join us. We're really happy to have Mike join us on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Mike, you've become, as Michael said, sort of the face of the administration, and I guess that is your role as the director of communications, but particularly on Twitter, responding directly to people's questions. You're following up on a lot of different questions related to COVID-19 and the administration's response. So Twitter all-star for sure. I'm sure you're up to your neck in COVID-19 stuff. But I think today we're really interested in talking about communications in the public sector generally, but also, given the circumstances of the moment, we want to get into the importance of communications in the time of a crisis. And that's certainly something that you've become familiar with.
I guess I'll try and couch this a little bit and say, for our listeners' benefit, this wasn't our thinking, let's bring in the administration and have this be a soup to nuts conversation about policy and legislation and every state agency and all that kind of stuff. We want to take advantage of having the guy with us on communications and really talk about communications issues. Now, Mike didn't ask for any guardrails or stay away from any particular topics, but our goal is to talk about comms and how that fits into, both the pandemic issues of the moment, but also sort of the governor and the administration's vision for governance. We'll have time to talk about bills and talk about legislative issues and the role of the administration down the road. Today, let's focus on comms.
So, Mike, let's start first. I know that you have a history in D.C. Let's talk about the path that got you here to Maryland. Talk about your history in D.C. working in communications and really what brought you here to Maryland.
Prior to this, I worked on Capitol Hill for 13 years. I started in 2005, which was, I think, 2 Republican majorities ago when Dennis Hastert was Speaker. And I just worked my way up the leadership ladder as a speechwriter, really. That's always what I wanted to do. I grew up wanting to be a speechwriter. And I worked my way up the leadership ladder. In 2009, I went to work for then Minority Leader John Boehner, and we won the majority a year later. And I worked in both his speakership and Paul Ryan's speakership. So I worked over the duration of those 8 years. When Speaker Ryan left office at the beginning of last year, I said to myself that I was done with public service, and I had done my time. And about a month later, we had a baby that month, January of 2019, and I was sitting around enjoying being a stay-at-home dad, and I got an email from Matt Clark, our chief of staff, who I've been in touch with over the years and who I knew through mutual DC friends, asking me to consider working for the governor. And I had never, obviously, I had most done all my time generally in the legislative branch. I don't know how I did it for as long as I did. The executive branch, you get things done. You say something should happen, and it happens. And I started here last March, and here I am, a little more than a year later. And it's been quite a transition. I still feel like I'm making that transition sometimes, but this is the state where we're raising our kids, and it's a state where my wife grew up, and it's a privilege to serve. That's
interesting. Forgive me for the kind of personal sidelight, but I'm intrigued by wanting to do political speech writing that feels like an interesting niche. So, did you have particular role models? Were you saying, I want to be Peggy Noonan? Or
Sure. My father, I grew up in the, grew up in the 80s, and my father let me stay up late for two things. For World Series games, that was the brief period in the mid-'80s when the Mets were good. And he let me stay up for President Reagan's Oval Office addresses. And obviously I was young. I didn't understand the content per se, but I just thought that I just loved the majesty of it, that he was giving us important information. And yeah, I was that kid that wanted to, read speeches, and I wrote letters to the president and the vice president. Also, Mario Cuomo was governor of New York when I was growing up, and he was considered a good orator. And I remember that's actually my first book of speeches, was a book of Mario Cuomo speeches, believe it or not. And it's just something I always wanted to do. And you mentioned Peggy Noonan. It was surreal because I eventually got to meet her when she came in to interview Speaker Boehner. And I was only there. I wasn't there to stay at the interview. I was there to talk to her afterwards and kind of compare notes and get her wisdom. But it's a unique craft. And I ended up expanding, beyond it to other communications. But I believe that anytime I talk to future and current future communicators, I talk about the importance of writing. Everything we do is content, whether it's a tweet, a Facebook post, a memo, an email to somebody. Everything really goes back to content. And I always believe that good writers will stand out in this business, and I still do maintain that.
It's an interesting path. I myself spent some time in New York State during Mario Cuomo's time as governor there, and I would agree that he was somebody worth paying attention to when he walked in front of a microphone. So I appreciate that perspective, and it also helps, understanding how it turned out, how Maryland was lucky to land you with family connections and some background there. Let me shift gears to follow up on one thing that you said, the role as a communications director. And I love the idea of the executive branch being really different from legislative branch. I want to get into that too, but I'm not sure that even everybody in politics would really understand where you see that station fitting. So, if there's sort of a spectrum between the purely, partisan person who's out here for a reason and that's doing opposition work, or it's, really sharp partisan messaging, versus there are other people who are in communications, but their job is issue and type the press release and hand it to the right people, and that's basically the end of it. Can you kind of tell us, where do you see your role working with Governor Hogan for the state of Maryland on that larger perspective?
Sure. Well, I think, we all have different titles, but the sort of classic title that we use, whether it's at the local level, the state level, is public information officer. Mm-hmm. And especially in a crisis like this, I believe that the word information takes on the most importance, because it's important for people to have official sources of information, whether it's something we say, something we tweet. And so in this crisis, from day one, the governor has set the tone. I remember one of the first meetings, he said, we're not going to BS people. We're going to give them the facts. We're going to arm them with the facts and the data about what's happening and the decisions that we're making. And that really set the tone for what I believe is the most effective kind of communications, which is fact-based, information-driven. Now, listen, there are going to be times, especially in the legislative session. I think in recent weeks, we've all seen politics kind of come back into things and kind of come back to the fore. But there are people out there that are relying on you to get them information. Now, as you know, the media is often driven to conflict. Conflict's a good story, right? And there are going to be times you're going to have to throw an elbow. You're going to have to kind of lay down the facts and the law as you see it. But I believe the best thing we can do is try to stay above the politics and try to make sure that you have a clear narrative, that you're communicating what you're doing and why you're doing it, and making sure that people aren't distorting what you're doing, that they're not trying to take advantage. But I have to tell you, it's jarring sometimes. You go on Twitter and there'll be a legislator that you just talked to 5 minutes ago, but then they go on Twitter and they're just like writing this dramatic, I'm calling on the administration to do X tweet. And I'm just so confused, It's so jarring. But my job is just to kind of keep, as the governor has from the beginning of this crisis, just kind of stay focused on what's best for the people in Maryland and stay focused on delivering information. So, there are different kinds of spokespeople. Some are more geared toward the partisan side of things. And, having been on Capitol Hill, I had to do my fair share of that. But I believe that when we focus too much on conflict, especially when it's pretty thin, it's just, there's a dispute about who leaked what on a phone call or whatever. I think that the best thing we can do is give information to people. And I think that's why the people valued the governor's leadership throughout the crisis, because he's delivered information and actions and has kept them informed as he goes.
We know that counties are inherently less partisan and less political than higher levels of government. But our hope here today is that our county listeners can glean some ideas from the things that you're talking about. I think it's very valuable. Back to Speaker Boehner, there is a fantastic photo. I don't know if it's on your Twitter account. There's a great photo of you with Speaker Boehner, and he's sort of leaned back in his chair and he's smoking a cigarette. And I think everybody knows that Speaker Boehner smoked and the window's open.
I'm happy to tell you that story quickly. Well, first of all, we always had a rule about not putting on photos of him smoking. A couple dribbled out over the years, which is fine. Obviously, it was an open secret that he smoked, and he smoked in the Capitol. I think that was when we were preparing for a speech for the Congressional Gold Medal for Jack Nicklaus. He would sort of lean back in the chair and just think of he would tell me some stories, and we would put something together. But I didn't get that. Nobody gave me that picture until my last few days in the Capitol. But it was. And I don't get to see him as much now, obviously, but I worked for him for 6 years and learned a lot about, and this is, I think, a lesson for folks out there, is I learned a lot about patience and just the power of he had this, folks can go back and look at how much he was attacked over the years, the Tea Party, by whoever. He would come in every day, have his coffee, say his prayers. He was the same every day. And it taught the rest of us so much about patience and perseverance, and he's still the same guy. You see him; he just talks about golf, and he's happy as a clam these days.
The governor has had a few mantras for a long time, some before your time on the team. Any thoughts on the utility of a phrase like "change Maryland for the better" as a device to organize public impressions, and how does that help the mission of government overall?
I would say two things. First, the governor is very in tune to the importance of telling a story around a big picture. I don't want to call it a slogan, but having something to, I like this crisis is another example. From the beginning, he said, we're all in this together. And the importance of having everything kind of go back to that overarching phrase. And when I think of change Maryland for the better, I think of Malaya Cromer did a piece about the governor recently where she called it, she had a great phrase to describe the governor, which was combative bipartisanship, which sounds like an oxymoron, but the governor is always driven toward the side of action, And so when I think of changing Maryland for the better, I think of how, his resting pulse generally is associated with action and moving the ball down the field, even if it's only a few yards at a time. Whereas, for instance, I worked in Capitol Hill for 13 years where it took us 7 years to do a tax bill or something like that. So I think Change Maryland for the Better still remains to this day. It's in our email signatures, it's on our website, it's on our logo. And to have that, the staying power that it does, 5+ years, it kind of shows you the staying power of a positive, but also a message that's about getting things done and moving forward. And I think that's very valuable. And, throughout this crisis, we've seen that with something like We're all in this together. The name of our roadmap is Maryland Strong. We've had business owners putting back to business pledges up in their windows. So people want to rally around something. They want something to believe in. And I think the governor is good at. And this is different from, like in my previous jobs, we always had like legislative ideas and we tried to write agendas and come up with catchy names for them. This is different. This is about action and about uniting people and bringing them together under a banner and going forward. And that's why I think when you see something like that, seep through into the public consciousness, there's so much, people have so much going on in their lives to remember something like that, And obviously, when it comes to the governor, they associate him with a few things like cutting tolls and, school after Labor Day, cancer, and things like that. But even that we're still talking about Change Maryland for the better, 8 years after he created Change Maryland, that's a real credit to his leadership.
I don't think there's any way around that phrase and that sort of mantra is a fair word, right? But that has been a real part of, call it a brand or an identity. In polling, we know Governor Hogan gets positive marks from a really wide swath of residents in the state. But when you ask people the follow-up question, well, what is it you like? He's making changes. He's doing good things, right? It's vague positive, but mission driven. I don't know. I think it's fascinating. There's a political science PhD thesis waiting to happen for someone out there about the magic of a couple powerful words like Change Maryland. Mike, you sort of steered us into the power of that optimistic and get things done message having value in this environment. And that's a big part of why we wanted to talk to you now. We're in this circumstance where there's a public health crisis that has economic effects and really widespread societal effects. And that's a really big deal. That's when we're going to look to our political and civic leaders. We're going to look to people like Governor Hogan to both make decisions, but also help lead the conversation. And I'll start with a tip of the cap that, in some ways, we opened with a comment that to some degree you've been the face of the administration. Surely the governor is the face of the administration, but you taken a really active role in helping to echo the things the governor has said, but also to engage with other people who are in the media and sort of the hangers-on in social media and so forth. That's a real part of the job. You've been super present and super visible doing that sort of thing. Is that, I don't know, I want to ask this like silly question. This feels like, childhood journalism, but, so what's that like? Being cast in the middle of this and now you're fielding questions on public health stuff.
The best answer I can give you is that it's sort of an emotional roller coaster, because you can go from a simple question about, where do I get information about something, to someone who is having issues accessing, their unemployment benefits, or someone who has questions about the SNAP program or childcare. And I have talked to, and I think this is the most enriching part of it, is I end up having, I feel like I've met so many people along the way because I've, heard about their families and what they're going through. And that really, more than anything, these are our constituents. I work for them. So I should answer their questions. It's not a question to me. Now, I think there are members of the media that would prefer that I prioritize their questions over those questions I get on social media. But also, it's telling for me. It helps me see, wow, we're getting a lot of questions about this today. What does that mean? Does that mean that we're not doing enough? We're not clarifying enough things? It's sort of a early indicator of where the public sentiment is on something. In some cases, no, it's unrelated. It's a few people clamoring about something. So it when I say it's emotional roller coaster, it's representative of what people are going through right now. And I think that people just want a sense of that someone is listening to them, that someone's acknowledging them. And, we can do that in so many ways, whether it's the governor's press conferences, the governor's interviews. But for us to be responsive on social media, it's really just an extension of that. It's nothing It's nothing that occurred to me as different or special. It's just an extension of our strategy to reach people where they are. And in some cases, people have said, I can't be on Twitter. I want to get text messages, and we have a way to do that. Oh, I want to get newsletters from the governor because I'd rather just check my email once a night. So I said this early on a lot in the crisis. It's a rapidly evolving situation, and it deserves a rapidly evolving communication strategy. And that's what we really tried to do. But, interacting with people has been one of the constants for us. But it cuts both ways, obviously, in terms of good or bad, and people who are positive and negative. But I work for these people, so why wouldn't I answer their questions?
You mentioned the roller coaster, and you mentioned that you learned a lot about patience from Speaker Boehner. I'm sure that's a big part of it, but also empathy. And I think that has to be a big part of this. And, Michael and I are creatures of Twitter. I didn't think there were too many people that were on Twitter more than I am, but I think you're one of those people, and it's 24/7. You're constantly answering questions, posting updates. You and I have messaged back on county issues before. So that's certainly a good strategy, I think, to talk to people directly. And you mentioned all the other platforms that you're able to communicate with constituents. Another important part of messaging is that data really has to become a part of earning people's confidence and support during a crisis like this, right? And we all see the tweets every day about the COVID-19 case numbers and hospitalizations, and you have the zip code breakdowns now, but data is critical, and messaging that data, you have to be able to do that to earn confidence, especially during a crisis. So talk about the importance of data and how you message that data during a crisis, and how important that is to gain people's trust and confidence.
You've hit on something about the importance of data, because it goes back to just basic everyday transparency and arming people with information so that they can make informed decisions in their lives, whether it's seeing things in their zip code, seeing things by gender, by age range. Our job every day is to go find and fight the virus wherever it is and make sure it doesn't go where it's not. And when you have the data and you can show it to people, it gives everyone sort of a objective way to understand where we are and where we're going in the crisis. And I'll give you an example. You think about something like nursing homes. I can't begin to explain to you how involved it is to collect, collate, verify, recognize, understand data from 227 different facilities across the state. And a lot of concerns were raised about privacy, and it's just not something you would normally do, right? I mean, these are private facilities. People have their families there. Maybe they don't want media scrutiny. They don't want media showing up and saying, who are your 7 cases, But the governor felt that it was in the public interest to put that information out so that people have it, and so that families, really, it wasn't just about the residents and the staff. It was also about the families, because so they could feel that they were getting information and they could feel like they were a part of the process. Because, and this would happen crisis or no crisis, there are times when you have your family member in a facility like that and you just don't feel like you're getting information. And so to go back to your point about empathy, data can create a sense of connection and people feeling involved in finding and fighting the virus. We've seen some states where they've tried to sort of juke the data, some people have actually tried to make the graphs look different so the trends look different. You can't get around transparency. You have to put out reliable information, and we're so fortunate to have a data team. They're the unsung heroes of this crisis, in a sense that to every day at 10 o'clock or around that time, in that hour, we put out reliable data, and it's so important. And we'd all love to see these numbers go down more and go down faster, but the best we can do is put it out there and let people. I mean, obviously, governor has put out what the key metrics are based on the guidance that we've gotten from public health officials, but it creates a standard by which we can understand where the virus is and how we're doing. I know that's a long answer to your question.
No, but I mean, if woven through the answer is tell the truth, then there's an awful lot of virtue in that being what drives, that side of messaging. I'll also say that MACo staff, we're in the midst of trying to sort out what our summer conference offering might look like as an alternative to a big in-person event. But at some point, MACo will be back in the business of having these events and get-togethers and so forth. And in sketching together what we want to talk about, one of our conversations was the brilliant emergence of a good dashboard as a tool for public policy and communication. The coronavirus page run by the state of Maryland, actually, and the Johns Hopkins one, seem like they're carrying the banner for conveying a lot of relevant information concisely, effectively, and clearly. So, I mean, I agree. Hats off to the data team for doing that effort. My family looks at the Maryland page every day.
Yeah, and we've seen a number of counties implement those dashboards. And I agree, Michael, I think that's a big part moving forward of conversations among counties and from MACo. Data is so important and so critical, especially in times of a crisis. But we're going to go ahead and take a break right there. When we come back, we'll talk about the debate for how to, quote unquote, reopen Maryland, both sides of that debate. We'll get into a little bit of that with Mike. We'll also talk about some federal politics, all that and more after the break.
This is Brian Griffiths, the founder of Maryland Podcast Month. Maryland Podcast Month was founded in 2018 to draw attention to all of the great podcasts and podcasters here in Maryland. And during this time of social distancing, there is no better time to start learning more about locally produced podcasts. Shows like my podcast, Red Maryland Radio, Eye on Annapolis, the Conduit Street Podcast, JB's Drive-In Podcast, the Maryland Crabs, Quality Time, the Society Fringe Players, and more are still putting out fresh content. Visit MarylandPodcastMonth.com to learn more about these great Maryland podcasts. That's MarylandPodcastMonth.com. And we thank you for your support of local content.
Welcome back to the Conduit Street Podcast. Kevin Kinnally back here with Michael Sanderson and our special guest today, Mike Ricci, Director of Communications for Governor Hogan. So, Mike, I mean, we talked a lot about communications on the front half and the importance of data and telling the truth and making sure that people have various avenues to access information and data. Right now, as we all know, everything is focused on the lockdown versus reopen debate. It seems like for a while, the governor was taking heat. Some people referred to him as, quote unquote, Lockdown Larry and being too strict with masks and stay-at-home orders, etc. But lately, we're hearing from the other side that the local option, which is pretty much reopen if you can, has made some people uncomfortable on the other side. I mean, it seems like that is a whole feedback loop. I mean, what are your thoughts there? I know that you're fielding these questions every day on Twitter. I know that your office is hearing and receiving letters from people on both sides of the issue. How do you feel? How are you dealing with all of that and in the administration?
So I think, I'll say that the governor had the best response to this at his press conference last week when he said, some people think it's too soon, some people think it's too slow. So maybe, it's just right. And, I can remember at the beginning of the crisis when folks said it was too soon to close schools. When we did that, I can remember when people felt it was too soon to, close bars and restaurants and movie theaters. And now you have folks saying it's, we're not doing it fast enough. And the best we can do is kind of stay level-headed and listen to the doctors. It is a cycle, and it's interesting because, and I think our county executives have experienced this now in the last week, is, someone has to make these decisions. In the end, even with the data, right? Even with every recovery group, every doctor, someone has to make the decisions, and the governor has to make the decisions he was elected to make. And I'm saying that because it's just, we can talk around it. We can, we can all call on each other to do things, but in the end, he has to make these decisions, and our job is to carry them out and to see how they unfold. And I think that the reason people have sort of become reacquainted with their governors and the concept of, executive leadership throughout this crisis is because someone has to make these decisions. And when we make them, it's not so much about defending them. It's just about communicating what you're doing, why you're doing it. And I try sometimes at night, I'll sit and I'll try to sift through why okay, they are mad about what, why, and then how do I, not so much neutralize it, but what is you try to peel away the layers of somebody's objections. And in some cases it's political, in some cases it's genuine, in some cases it's, maybe they don't understand how something works and I can do a better job. Maybe I'm not doing it right. Maybe I'm not doing a good job explaining what contact tracing is or how testing works or why we picked the metrics that we did. But in the end, the decisions have to get made. We have to get on with it. And the best we can do is deal with objections as they come. You can't predict everything. In the beginning of this crisis, we had more unity probably. That's natural for politics to come back into things. But then again, there was a poll yesterday that the governor had, 85% approval among Marylanders for his handling of the crisis. So then you wonder, what is all the, what is all the shouting about? Maybe people in their daily lives feel good about what we're doing. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of my sentiment about it.
I meit's not like there's a magic bullet where there's one response, right, and then we just say, oh, well, I guess that completely resolves that issue. It's got to be a challenge. I would say I'm fascinated with, as we see, and you mentioning public polling suggesting there seems to be very broad general support for the things the governor's done in Maryland to take a measured approach with reopening, with being relatively quick and relatively aggressive to say these are things we think there are exposures we should close down. I'm really interested that it seems that some of the posturing and media is sort of driven by groups as opposed to individuals. And I don't know how much you can sift between one and the other, but when you and the administration are receiving emails or comments or social media pointed criticism and that sort of stuff, do you have any sort of filtering? This seems like it's a Marylander with a concern, as opposed to, gee, this feels like a form letter. Is there a way to deal with that any differently? That's a
very incisive question, because it kind of gets to how do you, and you can be very distracted, as you know, you can get distracted very easily by shiny balls, and very quickly you have something come in, around this time every day, people have their deadlines coming up, and you're getting these letters, you're getting this, and sometimes you can kind of see trends in how people are, the legislators, they sort of, they send around graphics to share, like they share the same graphic on Twitter. And so you can tell that they're sort of coordinating on that in that sense. But again, I just have found that if you just stay above that stuff and just try to give the most, the hardest part really is just kind of, if the reporters, they're under deadlines too. They're under fire too from their editors to get things done. There's this side, and that's it. And I'm always trying, and sometimes failing, just understand, here's what's happening, understand the facts, understand the dynamics, especially in this crisis when we have, there's so many steps involved in testing. There's so many steps involved in getting PPE to a local health department. And obviously something like that, nobody has 30 minutes to listen to me talk about that. But it's easier to say, okay, here's a letter from somebody attacking you. Please give me your response. And I know they're going to use, one sentence out of my 3 sentences. And what do I do? That's why I think that it's important for communicators. If I had advice for folks listening, is to try to build relationships with your reporters so they understand your mindset on things, and that they'll take the time to walk you through something. Don't only sort of get on folks when you get a bad headline. Don't only talk to folks when you want a good story. Just have relationships and build a two-way street of responsiveness and good faith, so that, if something happens and there is some kind of organized attack, or you see something coming, and that's the hardest part of communications. You have to have a feel, an instinct, something for, okay, this is about to be a day where we get hit with what, and how do we deal with that? How do we redirect that? How do we change that? And you really have to. That's why it's a constant job in that sense. You can't just be, I'm going to have this huge, nuclear response to something, or I'm going to have this huge, you can't get too up or down, if that makes sense. But you should understand. It is incisive, I think, to understand where something's coming from and why and when. Well,
as Mike, as you describe, the need to understand the dynamics, I'll play a little guessing game, and none of this feels particularly insightful. But so if we play things out from here, it seems like people's level of fatigue with being stuck at home, or their employer being shut down, or whatnot, whatever swath of Marylanders are in that posture, it just feels like 2 more weeks or 6 more weeks is going to increase at least some people's frustration. And maybe we'll get to the time for schools to reopen, or we'll get to a time of crisis with childcare, or other things are just going to make this tougher. It seems like the degree of difficulty probably goes up from here. Any sense that the messaging task will itself also get harder if this crisis doesn't cooperate the way we want, and we're still grappling with tough questions like these weeks and weeks from now?
No, I think that people, something I often say is that we had a stay-at-home order in place from late March to mid-May. People had weeks to be at home, watch the news, consume news, information, understand how this virus works, where it is, what's happening, how to go about their daily lives. I think people had more than enough time to reflect and to think about what the risks are, how to be vigilant, how to use personal responsibility, as the governor talked about last week at his press conference. It was almost like a period that people, and I see that in the, questions I get every day. People understand more about how this works. And, I think we have to trust the public and trust the people that we work for, so to speak. I worry more about politics. I worry more about people trying to cloud, the day with, their arguments. And while we're just trying to get people back to work, while we're trying to get people, their daily lives. So I think, we've had the same missions every day. That hasn't changed. And the governor has put out a detailed plan of what the next stages look like, that anybody can read, anybody can review and give their feedback, and many do. And the governor makes decisions based on that plan. That's the beauty of it. It's all there for people to read, from the citizens to county executives to everybody. So it's a roadmap, literally, in that sense.
So, Mike, I want to get into a few federal issues. And the first, we know that the Governor Hogan is the chair of the National Governors Association, and that role has him in sort of a different posture sometimes when he's talking directly to Congress about state issues and acting on behalf of the NGA. You have also been, sort of his comms guy, at least here in Maryland, when it comes to NGA messaging. So first, I want to ask, how does that role play into your role here in Maryland? How do you balance those two roles? Is it just when the governor puts out a press release on behalf of the NGA that you speak up? I've seen you talking about, and advocating for federal funding for states. That's something that the National Association of Counties is advocating for as well, for state and local governments who are being crushed by this pandemic in terms of losing revenue. But how do you balance those two roles? This is certainly a high-profile role that the governor has as the chair of NGA and speaking on behalf of all of the governors in the nation.
I'll answer that first. I sort of see that in two ways. The personal level is that it's interesting because I get to talk to the Capitol Hill reporters that I haven't seen in more than a year. And I get to, follow the dynamics on the Hill, which I haven't really for some time. So it has that sense of nostalgia for me. But the governor's NGA responsibilities are first, like every state, the governor has a federal director who handles those kinds of issues and handles our NGA stuff. Obviously, the governor has an NGA executive director and an NGA staff who work on policy, who advance these proposals. We just announced some positive news today about FEMA covering more of the, help the administration helping to cover more of the costs of FEMA's response on the state level. So we always have a team of people specifically dedicated to following those issues. And when they intersect, that's why I think, and people have asked, why is the governor doing so much national media? It's similar to how the speaker used to do national media for his members. The governor is also speaking on behalf of the governors when he does national media and trying to get the word out for governors and word out for the states. And so that's why part of our strategy has involved going on national TV and doing Sunday shows so that people can hear him in that capacity and his colleagues can see that he's out there fighting for their priorities. So it does have an interesting intersection for me, but I don't. You would find that I'm as Maryland focused as I can be every day. I get up, I look at the numbers, I stay as focused as I can on the Maryland stuff, and because that's what I'm here to do. And we thankfully have a great team dedicated to the NGA issues, and sometimes they intersect. And I'll talk to Governor Cuomo's communications director, I'll talk to Governor Newsom's communications director, Governor Baker's, which is interesting to begin with. Just comparing notes with another state, but the governor's ability to balance those hats and to fill those different roles is definitely a big part of this. And we're fortunate to have the NGA infrastructure that we do. And I know you all understand that as an organization, representing counties, and how important it is to have that sort of constant presence. It's almost built for situations like this, right? When you have to fight for priorities, do the policy legwork, bring together different strands and different people from different perspectives, different walks of life. So we've been very fortunate to have the NGA team with us throughout this crisis.
So Mike, I know you've walked the halls in Congress, and Kevin and I and our team on Conduit Street in Annapolis are by no means are we experts in following the workings of that body. We got our hands full in Annapolis, but we're all collective stakeholders in the debate going on there. I know the governor has been a big player on behalf of the Governors Association. Our National Association of Counties has been a big player. Both of us trying to raise the visibility of state and local services as an important part of our collective reaction to this crisis, particularly at this point on the economic side. That the CARES funding that's flown to the state and through to local governments in Maryland and in other places is helping a good deal with equipment and staff on the health side. We know there's a massive loss of public sector revenue that's right around the bend. We know that puts services and employees in jeopardy. And we know that state and local governments have balanced budget requirements. We can't just go print money. Do you have any thoughts from a comms perspective or as a congressional veteran staffer about sort of where this sits and how this logjam might play out? Because we're all very, very tied up in a game that we don't understand all that well.
I think you always have to look at it when you have to step back, and you'll see that there's general consensus that something needs to be done. If you sort of tallied up the people, they've all said something needs to be done. Some people want to tie it to this thing. Some people want to tie it to that thing. Some people want this number, that number. They want to do it in May. They want to do it in June. Some people have said July 4th. So you see the sort of the if you did like a Venn diagram, you can kind of see it coming together, but it's just going to take a while. It's going to take some time to get all these players on the same page, to get them to sit in a room, figure it out. The four corners, we usually call them. The four corners on the Hill, for them to get together, figure it out, work it out, get the administration's buy-in. It's just, as you know, it's just a process. And different people want to lay down different markers. And Pelosi's going to say this, McConnell's going to say that. And the governor's going to continue to weigh in for a bipartisan path forward. The problem is, the challenge here is when and how long it takes and how much states are going to go through on the ground, and as revenue numbers continue to come in. But we're optimistic because everyone seems to agree on the importance of it, but it's going to take some time. It's just how things work right now in Washington. It takes them time to get to the obvious. It's always been like that. And I think the governor will have more to say about this in the weeks ahead, but we just have to keep reminding lawmakers and legislators the importance of getting this done. And I know it's tough because, we see every day here the effect of the numbers, the revenue losses, and the choices that we have ahead of us. But, Washington, it just things now just take time. And it's either happen really fast without any sort of review or oversight, or they happen really slowly.
Yeah, I think on this podcast, Kevin and I have probably been guilty of drawing out this contrast between federal decision making and state level decision making really routinely, and we're guilty of all the time having this conversation of you can't count on DC to get this sorted out. They need 60 votes, and it's going to be full of this and full of that. Down here in the States, we'll figure it out. We'll be the ones leading the way, and that means a patchwork of different things in different places. But we're going to end up with a solution in Maryland because we just get stuff done at that level we need to.
We also have talked a lot about the single subject rule. I think that's a lot of what mucks things up in DC when you have all these riders added on to bills and stuff like that. But it also seems like this is a question of the role of government, and particularly when you look at the HEROES Act, which is the legislation on the table right now. I think the Republicans and the Democrats have different viewpoints there. And I think the Republicans have taken a posture where they'd like to see what happens and maybe wait a little bit while others would say we need to do it now. But, Mike, very well it does take a lot of time in D.C. to get things done. And hopefully Congress will get its act together and they will listen to organizations like the NGA, the governors, and then also the National Association of Counties, National League of Cities, who, representing folks that are on the ground and dealing with this crisis on the front lines and know that the need is now and that we have to take action. So, Mike, I think this has been great today, and we really appreciate you joining us. To close it on out here, do you have any thoughts for county leaders and decision makers, public information officers, how they can improve their connection with their residents during this sort of a situation, during a crisis like this particularly, or just in general?
Well, first, I would just say, if they're listening, thank you. Thank you for your service. I've gotten to meet so many, local PIOs, local emergency managers. I think that people hopefully have been able to reacquainted with that they have these local governments that are out there, fire rescue, emergency managers, folks that are out there every day who are in their communities, for moments like this. And I've had a chance to talk to so many of them over the course of this. And I would say, don't make it crisis-based. Take lessons from this. Take best practices from it and less than best practices from it. And think about how to retool and think about how to, what worked, what didn't work. What can you do better? I don't want to say next time, God willing, and God, we don't want a next time, but, a lot of times, and I remember this from my jobs on Capitol Hill, you'd go through a crisis and you just move on to the next one, and you wouldn't take time to really do an after action and think about, how do we, what lessons can we take? And so I think about, and as I've said, we try to evolve and adapt in real time and do things better. And some things we're able to improve quickly. Some things we're not. Sometimes the website to work, can't get a dashboard to work. But really be reevaluating yourself in real time, being honest with yourself about what's working, and take lessons from this. Sit down with your team and think about the communication side and what days were good and what days were bad. And there's going to be a lot of lessons to learn from this, and I can only hope that these folks will have the time and the ability to take that sort of 360-degree look at things, and as I know I will.
I know you're in the thick of things right now. I know that as we record here on Wednesday afternoon, there is a lot of news breaking in terms of childcare and whatnot, and how the state is moving forward. But we really appreciate you taking the time. We know you're busy. Michael, any closing thoughts before we let Mike go?
Grateful for the time and insights. It was everything we hoped for. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, that'll do it for this episode of the Conduit Street Podcast. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, please go ahead and subscribe. That way these episodes will be sent directly to you. You can also follow along on social media, Twitter, Facebook, and of course, the Conduit Street blog. But for Michael Sanderson and Mike Ricci, this is Kevin Kinnally signing off, and we will talk to you soon.